So coming up, December 14th, it is our unrehearsed Christmas pageant. And I know that as pastor, the party line is supposed to be that every Sunday here at Hillside Community Church is important and beautiful and interesting and fun. But let's be real. The unrehearsed pageant is the crown jewel of our church year. Hands down the best thing we do every year. If you haven't been before, the basic premise is that when you show up to church, you'll get to pick a role, and everyone in the congregation will be part of our telling of the Christmas story. No rehearsals. It's always a bit of a mess, a little chaotic, but it's also wonderful. If you haven't been, again, December 14th, be here or be square. But every year in this Christmas pageant, when the villainous King Herod, the person who was king when Jesus was born, when Herod makes his first appearance, he does so to some very specific entrance music, and Bryce is going to play it for us. That is the Imperial March, aka Darth Vader's theme song. And when we hear that every year, we laugh, don't we? Because that is a ridiculous comparison. I mean, King Herod may have been a bad dude, but surely he wasn't Darth Vader bad. Right, Pastor? He wasn't Darth Vader bad, was he? He wasn't that bad. And while there are great many things that I geek out over, Star Wars is not one of them, so I will leave it to the aficionados among us to make the final determination. But what I do want to do this morning is to offer a list of some, and this is by no means an exhaustive list, but I want to offer you a list of some of the more unhinged things that Herod did while he was king. And it feels important to say that this doesn't actually come from the Bible. This comes from extra-biblical historical sources. So to begin, the very first thing that Herod did when he came into power was to slaughter all of the men from the previous dynasty, the Hasmonean dynasty, to make sure they couldn't challenge the new dynasty he was setting up. And if that sounds to your ears just like a normal kind of kingly thing to do, I think it is important for you to know that his wife was actually from that former dynasty. So he was basically killing all of her male relatives. One time, he executed half of the 70-member Sanhedrin, which was basically the religious Supreme Court in Israel, because they had opposed him politically. One time, in a fit of rage, he had 300 of his own military leaders killed. One time, because he didn't quite trust her, he had his wife executed. And then his mother-in-law, and then 2 of his sons, and then for good measure, another one of his sons. And then as he lay there on his deathbed, he had assembled in a central building in Jerusalem dozens and dozens of the most prominent men in Jerusalem. And they were there, being held there by armed guards who had orders that the moment they learned of Herod's death, they were to execute these men. Do you have any idea why he did that? I'm going to tell you because you would never guess. This is totally unhinged. He did it because he recognized that he was not loved by the people of Israel, and he knew they would be happy when he died, but he wanted them to be sad and to mourn. Hence, he gave these orders. Thankfully, his sister Salome disobeyed these orders, and all of those men were eventually released. Again, whether or not Herod was worse than Darth Vader, I leave for you to decide, and if there is anything that I know about Star Wars fans, it is that you will not hesitate to let me know your very strong opinion on this most critical of matters immediately after the service. But what I think we can all agree on this morning is that in first century Palestine, being related to or even being in the vicinity of a king was a dangerous and a bloody business. And this is important for us to remember, because usually when we hear the story that we heard read this morning, the so-called story of the Annunciation, the story in which Mary says yes to becoming Jesus' mother, we usually hear it and say to ourselves, "Aw, shucks, doesn't that sound nice? This poor little nobody, nothing girl gets to be the mother not just of a king, but of the King of Kings. What an honor." And we say that because when we think about royalties, our mind has been trained by the Walt Disney Company to think immediately of glamorous balls and sumptuous gowns. Sure, maybe there is a beast or a villain to be dealt with, but they're just speed bumps in the road of what is an otherwise charmed existence. But when we hear this story, the story of the Annunciation, we would be better served if we let all of our Disney fantasies fall aside for at least a moment and considered how Mary herself would have thought about royalty. Now, being a good Jewish girl, she, of course, grew up hearing stories about King David and King Solomon and all of those guys. Not that they were particularly great men, but the only king that she had a lived experience of, the king that would have truly shaped her understanding of what royalty was about, was King Herod. King Herod came into power about 23 years before Mary was born, and it was just a few years before she was born that Herod executed his wife, who also happened to be named Mary. And it was during Mary's lifetime, in fact, just a couple years before the angel Gabriel's appearance to her, that King Herod executed 2 of his sons. So when this angel shows up and says, "You are going to be the mother of a king," you better believe Mary's mind doesn't go to glamorous balls and sumptuous gowns, but it goes in a much darker direction. Because in Mary's day and time, to be anywhere near a king was a dangerous and a bloody business. Nevertheless, Mary responds to the angel, "I am the Lord's servant, let it be to me according to your word." And knowing what we now know about what royal life was like in Mary's day and time, do you hear how Mary's reply does not have a Disney energy to it? It doesn't have an Elsa kind of energy to it, a Moana kind of energy to it, even a Jasmine kind of energy to it. No. It has a Malala kind of energy to it. It has a Greta Thunberg kind of energy to it. It has the energy of a teenage girl who fully and unflinchingly sees the darkness of the world, and despite the personal risk, despite the personal cost, this young girl steps up and says, "I am going to do something about it. I will do what it takes to help bring love into this violence, justice into this oppression, and light into this darkness." Now, did Mary know specifically that at the beginning of her son's life, she would be forced to flee to Egypt as a refugee in order to escape Herod's wrath? Though she did not. Did Mary know specifically that at the end of her son's life, she would be left standing at the foot of a cross upon which he was executed by the Roman state? No, she did not. But Mary did know that something like that was bound to unfold, because such was it to be the relative of a king. She knew it was a dangerous and bloody business, and even still, this teenage peasant girl answered, "I am the Lord's servant, let it be to me according to your word." Now, one of the most infuriating things about the world in which we live is how absurdly easy it is for powerful people to cause real harm. A careless sentence, a whispered order, a signature on the right form, and whole communities feel the consequences, while the one who set it in motion does not so much as lose a night's sleep. Clearly, this is not a new phenomenon. Herod had perfected the art. He could sit at his table, sip his wine, and with a quiet word order 300 military leaders killed. He never had to look at them in the eye. He never had to swing a sword. And all these years later, we still live in that kind of world. We live in the kind of world where someone can sit in a gilded office mapping out plans for their next ballroom, while tens of millions of our neighbors cannot afford to feed their families. We live in the world where those in the highest seats of power think nothing of unleashing armed thugs into our neighborhoods, tearing families apart and leaving whole communities gripped with fear. Yes, harm still comes quick and easy for those who hold the levers of power. But this morning's story, the story of the Annunciation, it refuses to let us shrug and say, well, I guess that's just how the world works. Because notably, God does not send the angel Gabriel to a palace. God does not send Gabriel to someone who is well connected. God does not send Gabriel to someone who already has a security detail. Rather, God sends Gabriel to a young girl at the bottom rung of society and hands her the most dangerous assignment imaginable: to carry love straight into the teeth of violent power. And Mary said yes. She said yes, not because she felt safe, not because she knew how it would turn out, but she said yes because courage doesn't wait. Courage doesn't wait for the world to get less dark. Courage, in fact, is what pushes the dark back. Which means that the invitation before us this morning is not to admire Mary from a safe distance, but to take her yes seriously enough to let it shape our own. To be the kind of people who refuse to accept the cheap and easiness of cruelty and choose instead the costly work of love. The kind of people who actually speak up when a coworker is belittled, even when it would be much easier to stay silent. The kind of people who show up with groceries when a neighbor quietly admits that they're struggling. The kind of people who stand outside an ICE facility with signs and prayers and stubborn hope because families belong together and silence helps no one. And also the kind of people who build coalitions and who join movements and who vote with the most vulnerable people in our world in mind, and who insist that power itself must be bent towards mercy and justice. That's what courage looks like in people like us. This is how ordinary people push back against Herod's old and new, not only with compassion, but also with collective power aimed at healing instead of harm. And so, friends, in the name of Jesus and in the example of his mother, who dared to carry a different kind of king into the world, may we have that same holy courage. Amen.